The Subcommittee on Information Technology will come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Good morning, everyone. In September, the chairman announced the release of a majority staff report on the data breaches at the Office of Personnel Management. This committee spent a year digging into what went wrong at OPM. We looked at everything from how the hackers got into what technologies OPM was buying while responding to the incident. And while we learned a great deal, there was an unfortunate conclusion that the damage of this data breach could have been mitigated. It's impossible to prevent all data breaches, especially when we are talking about a determined and sophisticated adversary, but we can deter and mitigate the effects of these breaches. Some of that, like investigation, attribution, and prosecution, is outside the agency's control, but other aspects, like improving cybersecurity protections and continuous monitoring, are squarely within agency CIO's control. That is why we need to get into the weeds on everything from access controls to vulnerability management to make sure we aren't making it easy for hackers to get access to our sensitive data. And this is a conversation that starts with the agency CIO. CIOs are the focal point for all things information technology at every federal agency, department, office, and bureau. That is why this subcommittee has worked together to ensure the continued implementation of FITARA, and more broadly, making sure that CIOs have the necessary authorities to finally bring federal systems into the 21st century. The House recently passed my bill, the MGT Act, co-sponsored by Mr. Connolly, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, Ranking Member and my friend, Ms. Kelly, the Majority Leader, the Minority Whip, and Mr. Liu from California, which incentivizes agency CIOs to modernize their agency's outdated legacy IT through fiscal responsibility. I urge the Senate to pass the MGT Act as Congress so that incoming administration has the necessary tools to modernize our outdated and insecure federal IT. This is a shared responsibility. Congress can't hold agency CIOs accountable for what's going on in IT if those CIOs don't have the necessary authorities to get the job done. We need CIOs staying at their post for longer than the current 2-year average. If we're going to move the ball forward, we need federal CIOs not only with the necessary authorities to make their vision a reality, but who are sticking around long enough to see it happen. This is why the OPM CIO was such a focus of the OPM data breach report and its recommendations. We need empowered, accountable, and competent CIOs, which brings us to our panel here today. We need a serious conversation about the role of the federal CIOs in information security. The President recently announced the creation of a federal CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, that will report to the federal CIO. Should that be a model for federal agencies, the CISO reporting to the CIO? Or should the CISO report directly to the head of the agency? Does the head of an agency need to hear two voices on questions of IT procurement, computer systems, data storage, and balancing the needs of the production environment with those of cybersecurity? This is an open question that this subcommittee has not yet explored, but I think it is an important question moving forward as we continue to conduct oversight of federal information security policies and practices. And finally, we need to address how these agencies transition their information technology over to the new administration. Each agency will have unique challenges, and I would like to hear from our witnesses how they are going to facilitate this transition. We are making progress in information technology and cybersecurity, and I'm committed to ensuring that we don't backslide on this profound national security challenge. Ultimately, cybersecurity is a collaborative effort that is going to require continuous attention and effort from all parties to make sure our data is safe. And I'm glad my partner in crime in this endeavor is a gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Kelly, the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Information Technology and my friend, and I'd now like to recognize her for her opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Hurd, and welcome back. Thank you for holding this important hearing on the state of federal cybersecurity in the wake of the OPM data breach, and I thank the witnesses for joining us today to testify. Cybersecurity is a critical concern for both the public and private sectors, as the recent breaches affecting millions of people at the Office of Personnel Management and Yahoo illustrate. In our investigation of the OPM data breach, we discovered that a sophisticated nation-state adversary targeted both OPM and private sector companies performing services for the government in order to steal sensitive information about federal employees. In fact, the OPM breach was achieved using credentials taken from one of our OPM's contractors. The minority staff memorandum concluded that federal cybersecurity is intertwined with government contractors and that cyber requirements for government contractors are inadequate. In the past 2 years, Congress passed and President Obama signed into law the Federal Information Security Modernization Act of 2014, known as FISMA, and the Federal Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2015, known as the FCEA. These laws create stringent standards for agency information security programs and will implement innovative technologies such as the Einstein Federal Detection and Intrusion Prevention System, as well as multi-factor authentication, I'm losing my words. Congress has a responsibility to ensure that agencies are complying with these enacted pieces of legislation. This past July, the committee sent bipartisan letters to the 24 CFO Act agencies requesting information on FISMA and FISMA compliance and FCEA implementation progress. We are here today to discuss agency compliance with FISMA and agency progress on the upcoming December 2016 deadline for FCEA implementation. I understand that the Office of Management and Budget recently issued a report on FISMA required independent evaluations of agency information security systems for fiscal year 2015. This report shows a decline in agency FISMA scores over the past year for our 3 witnesses agencies here today. Each agency's independent evaluation of their information security programs highlights the strength of their individual programs and areas that can use improvement. One of the key aspects of FISMA is moving from a check-the-box mentality of cybersecurity to an approach of continuous monitoring and reporting. I would like to hear from our witnesses as to how Congress can help them achieve that goal. I would like to hear if any challenges are being encountered in the implementation of FCEA required programs and practices. I want to again thank our witnesses for their testimony today. Effective federal cybersecurity is possible through cooperation between agencies and Congress. I look forward to having a discussion on how we can better work together to develop policies that will secure not only agency systems, but private sector systems as well. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've long said that federal government needs to lead by example when it comes to improving our national cybersecurity, and I'm proud of this step we've taken in this subcommittee toward this goal. But it's clear that we have much more work ahead, and I look forward to continuing our work together in Congress.
I do too. I'd like to thank the ranking member. I'm going to hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. I'd now like to recognize our panel of witnesses. I'm pleased to welcome Ms. Renee Wynn, Chief Information Officer at NASA, Mr. Jonathan Album, Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Thank you for being here, sir. And Mr. Robert Klopp, Deputy Commissioner and Chief Information Officer at the Social Security Administration. Welcome to you all, and pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. So please rise and raise your right hands. Raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow ample time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written record will be made part of our record. And now I'd like to recognize Ms. Wynn for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Good morning. Chairman Hurd, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for allowing me today to appear before you to address NASA's efforts to effectively manage and protect our information technology resources. Like other federal agencies, malicious threats to NASA's networks are constantly evolving, which means our work is never done. Thus, I want to reassure you today that IT is a top priority at NASA. As NASA's Chief Information Officer, my office works to ensure that NASA's IT systems are safeguarded from attack, assessed against stringent federal and agency security requirements, and appropriately monitored for compromise. Each day, thousands of NASA personnel, contractors, academics, and members of the public access part of NASA's IT infrastructure. a complex array of information systems geographically dispersed. This infrastructure plays a critical role in every aspect of NASA's mission, from transforming the way we fly, to controlling spacecraft, to processing scientific data. Unfortunately, there is no single approach or tool that can predict, counter, and mitigate the wide range of attacks that threaten networks. NASA works constantly to identify and counter attacks by implementing proactive and adaptable security measures. We also work closely with the Department of Homeland Security and other federal agencies to implement new technologies and share best security practices, partnerships which have improved NASA's security posture. For example, under FISMA metrics, NASA has made improvements in our anti-phishing, malware, and network defense. We have significantly reduced our cybersecurity risk as measured by the Department of Homeland Security's Cyber Hygiene Report. NASA now has a permanent Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, who works on operational IT security and compliance matters with all of NASA's center CISOs, as well as the federal Chief Information Security Officers. Like all agencies, NASA is adjusting to new laws and directives designed to improve the entire federal government's IT security posture. While NASA is making progress in some security metrics, much work remains. As we move forward and find new ways to work across NASA, our metrics may unfortunately dip as we uncover and we work to resolve new issues. However, as new technologies come online and culture issues are resolved, we expect to see improved metrics in 2017. Through the implementation of our Business Services Assessment, or BSA, we took a hard look at how we manage IT. This BSA outlined a series of steps the agency should take and is taking to optimize and protect our IT assets. The BSA results will ensure that IT is seen as a strategic agency resource, establishing clear direction for NASA CIO to approve the agency's IT spend plan for non-highly specialized and highly specialized IT. In my personal opinion, this BSA is a gift which says, NASA supports you as the CIO, and we do want you to transform the way NASA manages IT. These are big steps forward for NASA, and NASA should be commended for taking the necessary steps to improve. We know there still is a lot of work to do. Thus, I want to end my remarks by assuring you that protecting and evolving NASA's IT infrastructure is and will remain an agency priority. We look forward to working with Congress, the Government Accountability Office, the NASA Inspector General, and other federal stakeholders to effectively implement a restructured and strengthened IT security program at NASA. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your remarks, Ms. Nguyen, and thanks for being here again. Mr. Albom, you're recognized now for 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Chairman Hurd, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for your diligent work on cybersecurity and the IT scorecard. I appreciate having this opportunity to share USDA's efforts to strengthen its cybersecurity posture over the last few years. The Department of Agriculture touches the lives of all Americans. Protecting USDA customer, partner, and employee data is a top priority for Secretary Vilsack and me. Together, we work across USDA to ensure we have the right tools and culture as new threats emerge. In terms of cybersecurity tools, I'm pleased to tell the committee that USDA has successfully completed our initial implementation of Einstein 3A. USDA employs a risk-based approach to cybersecurity, prioritizing resources where they will have the most significant impact. Einstein is key to this approach. Over the coming weeks, we will continue to work with DHS to bring additional Einstein capabilities online, and we fully expect to meet all of the December deadlines. I'm also proud to share that USDA is one of the leading agencies participating in the DHS Continuous Diagnostic and Mitigation Program, also known as CDM. I've made this a priority for the department. We are currently implementing the capabilities of Phase 1, which gives us increased insight into what is on our network. This improved visibility helps us to prioritize future modernization initiatives and protect the information of the people we serve. Einstein and CDM, combined with our Security Operations Center, or SOC, position USDA to proactively detect, prevent, and mitigate cyber attacks. The USDA SOC is starting to use big data technologies to analyze trends and anomalies by correlating security data from multiple sources. We have partnered with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, to pilot many of these tools. As pilots like these demonstrate positive results, USDA will explore the potential for a department-wide rollout. Additionally, my team routinely conducts penetration testing assessments to identify security vulnerabilities in our systems. These findings are used to develop plans to remediate risk and improve system security. USDA also created a list of high-value assets and has worked with DHS to perform additional penetration testing assessments of these systems over the past year. Effective cybersecurity is as much about education and culture as it is about having the right tools in place. Secretary Vilsack strongly supports my office in ensuring that USDA senior executives and employees understand their daily role in preserving the department's reputation as a trusted government partner. In the past year, I created a scorecard to build awareness of the department's cybersecurity posture. Every 2 weeks, component agency heads are provided with a status of key cybersecurity hygiene factors for their organizations. This increased insight gives USDA officials the information they need to balance programmatic requirements with continuous improvements in cybersecurity. For example, this approach supported our drive to increase the usage of personal identity verification, or PIV cards, across the department. Over the past 16 months, we increased our usage rate from 15% to over 92% for non-privileged users, and from 6% to over 96% for privileged users. USDA employees face an increasing number of malicious emails and social engineering cyber attacks like phishing. Through a recent anti-phishing campaign, we recognized that additional safeguards, like email subject line warning messages, were needed to render phishing attacks less effective. As a result of these activities, USDA achieved a greater than 50% reduction in the click rate of simulated phishing attempts. Further, my team and I fully support the push for additional measures to improve information sharing across government to enhance cybersecurity readiness and response. In May 2016, USDA became the first department to develop and successfully test new procedures required by the Federal Cybersecurity Enhancement Act for notifying Congress within 7 days of a major incident. As threats continue to proliferate and to adapt to existing defenses, USDA, like all government agencies, will need appropriate resources to employ emerging technologies and new approaches to mitigate these risks. For example, the department's FY17 budget included a requested increase of $10 million to enhance USDA's cybersecurity capabilities. It is critically important that we discuss these issues and related impacts. So again, I want to thank you for holding this hearing to shed light on this important topic. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share information about our progress in strengthening USDA's cybersecurity program. USDA is committed to an open and continuous dialogue with Congress about new opportunities to improve our defenses, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Klopp, you're on the clock for 5 minutes. Welcome to your opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Hurd and Ranking Member Kelly. Earlier, I provided a status update in my written testimony, which I won't repeat here, but I would like to share a couple of updates, provide a review of our Department of Homeland Security reporting, and share some thoughts tied to the OPM breach report. First, regarding the status of our Einstein implementation, the agency completed phase 3 of this program in March of this year, and it's been in production since then, so we were early. Next, regarding our implementation of CDM, which has been mentioned here, we're on schedule to deploy phase 1 of that in December, so we're on track there as well. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the ongoing Department of Homeland Security reporting. What we see is sort of a continuous process of discovery and remediation. DHS has come on site twice to evaluate high-value assets. This resulted in 16 recommendations. They called out 2 critical items, one of which was a vulnerability. 8 of these items are resolved, including both critical items. 5 recommendations are complete, but require sort of continuous improvement. 2 are in progress and will resolve in this fiscal year. And 1 around network segmentation is actually a very large project, which will begin in FY17. As you may know, the DHS scans the agency weekly, producing cyber hygiene reports. I'm happy to report that it found no critical vulnerabilities since the inception of this program. DHS also produces monthly vulnerability reports. This process sort of continuously reports that we score in the top 3 with the smallest number of vulnerabilities of any reporting agency. Proactively, the agency runs daily in-house penetration tests managed through an automated system. In 2016, we identified 1,872 vulnerabilities and remediated them on the average of every 22 days. The agency participates in an annual financial statement audit. In FY15, auditors found no material weaknesses, 1 significant deficiency, and produced 59 findings and recommendations. Since these findings, we have implemented automated support to request new access to systems, to schedule the removal of access for departing staff, and progress on all but 1 of the 59 findings. Most importantly, I'm happy to report that the agency has no major incidents to report to date. Regarding the OPM breach report, we took this report very seriously. In the interest of time, let me sort of focus on what we think is the most far-reaching of the 10 recommendations. That was recommendation number 2 regarding the deployment of a zero-trust model. I'd like to give you sort of an example of our intention and direction on that. We're implementing now a new zero-trust capability for systems administrators, where access is revoked and renewed with each new administrative task. These administrators don't get any permanent passwords. As you may know, systems administrators hold the keys to the kingdom. By implementing a zero-trust model for sysadmins, first we expect to significantly upgrade our posture. I think all of the witnesses here are testifying about the increased threat of cyber attack. It's not a surprise. And some are suggesting that we need to take a more aggressive stance as a government with regard to that. But I think our IT systems are sort of the equivalent of B-52s, dependable but outdated and vulnerable. We appreciate this committee's awareness of the need for IT modernization and appreciate even more the bipartisan measure, H.R. 6004, which you mentioned. It's a really important step, but H.R. 6004 is an unfunded vehicle, and what we need is funding. To defend our IT assets to the standard you and the public expect, we need the cyber equivalent of defense spending. We need a fully funded investment in IT modernization. So I'd like to thank you for your support, and now I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, sir. And I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Nguyen, when did you start in your position?
I started with,
Can you hit the record? Yeah.
sorry. I started with NASA on July 13 in 2015, and I became the I started as the Deputy CIO, and I became the Chief Information Officer at the end of September of 2015.
Gotcha. So, if my math is correct, about a year?
Yeah,
A little bit under?
just slightly over a year, going towards 14 months.
Gotcha. So I guess we're in November now, huh? There's been plenty of reports about how over the summer, the NASA's, the Agency Consolidated End-User Service, or do you call it ACES? Yeah. Was operating under a conditional authority to operate since July 24th. My understanding is that you declined to sign off on the authority to operate for ACES because of a difference of opinion between your office and the contractor operating the system. That it was the issue was over patching, it seems like. Now, I think this is actually a good news story, right? Because you obviously felt you had the authorities to do those kinds of things, and you're using your technical judgment. Can you walk us through the thought process during that decision?
Yes, I
My friend,
can.
yield just for a second.
Sure.
Forgive me, but I have a hearing upstairs, but I didn't want to miss this. I just asked unanimous consent my opening statement be entered into the record. Forgive me, I got to go back upstairs to another hearing on the census, but someday, hopefully, the good Lord will give me the gift of bilocation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection. Thank you. Ms. Nguyen.
NASA will get to work on that bilocation. Yes, so, yes, the authority to operate for our end-user services, we have several of them. It's a very complex set of systems. The one in particular had to do with the client-based devices that we use, computers. and that. And it was presented to me on July 25th. The presentation is on the security risks and how those risks were to be mitigated. And upon that, I ask if they can look me in the eye and say free and clearly they would recommend signature. And on that date, they presented to me the package as we usually go through. And at that point, both on the operational side as well as the gentleman who was brought in for security to serve as the acting CISO, as our acting CISO was on vacation, on the operational side, said that they could not recommend to me signature because we had a discrepancy on numbers of devices as well as the status of the patches and how quickly they were being deployed and the status of that deployment. So it's both the timing and effort. And the gentleman who was acting as the acting CISO for me at the time said that he also could not agree to sign, could not recommend signature for the authority to operate. And so I asked a series of questions. What does that really mean? And in this instance, we didn't have enough data to make a sufficient risk determination on whether the ATO should be signed or not. And so at that point, I said that I would not sign and that work needed to be done on the side of both NASA as well as HPES to get the work done. By that Friday, so this was a Monday, by that Friday I had signed the authority to operate because we were able to see and understand the risks that I would be signing off on.
So did that give anyone at NASA heartburn? Did you receive any flack for not signing off on an ATO? Because if I remember correctly, the news coverage at the time, I think the term was unprecedented step. And I imagine that a CIO letting a major system authorization to operate expire turned some heads.
Yes, Chairman, it did turn some heads. So the actions, right, when one does this action, news of this significance would spread fast. So I made sure that the chief information security officers around our centers, as well as our chief information officers around the centers, were aware of my decision. And then my next step was to inform the administrator and the deputy administrator of the action that I had taken, as well as letting our press office know as well. We figured that there would be, this would leak out and become information and headlines. And so I was supported by everybody for making this decision, and I would do it again. I wish that we hadn't ever reached that point, and so we worked on some prevention effort. HPES has definitely stepped up to the plate in terms of working with us, and they and my team have actually responded very positively that the authorities to operate, as you said, are not to be rubber stamped. Absolutely. If my signature is on that and there would have been a breach the next day, then it would be very obvious that I would not have done the job that I was asked to do on behalf of the NASA as well as of the federal government.
Well, I'd like to commend you on making a tough decision, and these are the kinds of decisions that we want to see more CIOs making. That's the whole reason we're empowering you to make these types of decisions. So I'd like to get into a procurement question a little here, and so if a system doesn't get the approved ATO, how does that work? You know, do you have the authority to change, move? Does that void the contract? How does that, can you give me some insight onto that process?
NASA's procurement for an information system has the security requirements, the federal security requirements in that. We would need to work on procurement clauses, and I think these would need to be broad federal government clauses in terms of ramifications of an authority to operate and what would happen after that. The CIO, in concert with the rest of the agency, would need to be able to work out whether that system needed to be shut down and modernized or upgraded, or, because not every system is the same, others are not in a clean position to say, okay, we just can't do this anymore and go that. So we would need some flexibilities to make those determinations but I believe that procurement clauses would need to be added for the benefit of the federal government.
So am I understanding your statement correct? You would like to have that authority?
I would like to have that authority.
Mr. Album, do you have any opinions on this topic, on ATOs and budget authorities and things?
Sure. Thank you, sir. In the year or so that I've been the USDA CIO, I have not been in a situation where I've had to disapprove an ATO or not sign. However, similar to Ms. Nguyen, I see within the U.S. Department of Agriculture the support to make the right decisions. We have a enterprise IT board that is composed of our undersecretaries, chaired by the deputy secretary, where we can bring challenging IT decisions before that board and have a robust conversation. So we've done that, not on an ATO, however. On the point regarding procurements, having that contract language, I think, would be very good, and I agree that it would need to be something that's government-wide. We'd have to understand how that works, because oftentimes with the establishment of an ATO, there's a component that is the contractor's required to do. There's a component that the federal staff has to do. So having good, very clear roles and responsibilities and very clear timelines would be critical. Procurement language, contract language would definitely help.
Mr. Klopp, any opinions on this?
Actually, we had a very similar situation to the NASA situation, where we had a very large contractor who was running our call center and how was not compliant. We took a little bit different approach, which is that we revoked the permanent ATO and provided them with a provisional ATO that extended for 90 days and then continued to extend that and put pressure on them, threatening the unprecedented move that Renee went to, but never actually pulling the trigger on it. In the end, it took us about a year to get that system completely compliant, but the pressure and threat of pulling the ATO is what allowed us to do it. So I would certainly agree if we were able to have the kind of some sort of legal wording in there that forced vendors to do this as one more lever on top of them, that would be really valuable for us.
Because I would even take it a step further. In the MGT bill, when we get that past the Senate, I hope you're listening. This is an opportunity, because if you had to change, if you had to move in a different direction, I would consider that savings, right? That if some project had to stop, I would consider that savings and would be able to go into the working capital fund that you would continue to have access to for 3 years, right? So that is an additional tool, so that you're not having to run against the clock. And I think what most people don't recognize is that your systems, your networks are so big, and there's so many devices on it, that changing a system in the course of a year is next to impossible. And that's why you need the additional flexibilities with those resources. And so that would be the next logical continuation of this topic. Ms. Nguyen, the ACES, is it currently operating on a conditional, or has it gotten a standard ATO?
Our ACES contract is on a ATO that, like Rob was talking about, that's running on an 18-month time frame. So, and we've got regular meetings on both the ATO as well as making sure that our teams, NASA and HPES, are working together to ensure that the next ATO is either longer or has the right time frame for checks and balances.
And Mr. Album, am I to infer from your statements that USDA does not currently have any systems operating without an ATO?
No, that's not correct. There are some systems that don't have an ATO. USDA has employed an ongoing assessment process, and we assess 1/3 of all of the controls of each system. We have 329 systems annually. So it is possible during the assessment of those controls, we'll find something that requires us to revoke an ATO and work with an agency to get back into compliance. So the number of systems we have and the number of systems that have a valid ATO is in flux because of this process. So again, to your point, I think it's a good thing if we find something that says we're not going to have an ATO for the system right now. We're going to work to correct it.
Gotcha. Thank you. I'd like to now recognize Ms. Kelly for her lines of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to dig a little deeper into the cyber requirements for government contractors. In my opening statement, I mentioned that the minority staff of this committee found that federal cybersecurity is intertwined with government contractors and that cyber requirements for government contractors are inadequate. So in response, OPM has strengthened its contracting requirements by heightening incidents reporting and access to contractor systems. Ms. Nguyen, would you agree that having increased incident reporting requirements and access to contractor systems will enhance federal cybersecurity? And if you agree, how so?
Congresswoman, the answer is yes.
And do you have similar requirements for contractors at NASA?
We have a lot of the standard clauses required to pass along the federal requirements onto those contractors, and we work to enforce those as well.
Okay. And has NASA taken any other measures regarding cybersecurity in the wake of the OPM breach?
Yes, we have. We've done a couple of efforts. One is that at NASA, given some of the sensitive work that we do in intellectual property that we have, we are definitely a target for hackers. And so we've got a number of, I'll get into too technical, but we've got air-gapped systems. We take a look at what our high-value assets are. In fact, we're working right now to trim the list of high-value assets so that it's a single list for the agency instead of one from a cyber perspective and another for safety, because safety and cyber go hand and glove for NASA, as they would probably for any federal agency. And with our new federal CISO, we're also taking a hard look. Not federal CISO, she works for NASA, sorry. She's taking a hard look at our processes and procedures and making sure that we are, in fact, doing the best that we can do with tools and bringing in assistance from other federal agencies.
Thank you. And our other witnesses, have your agencies done anything to enhance the cybersecurity or cyber requirements for contractors in response to the breach?
Yeah, so we have an incident response policy at USDA that contractors are required to follow if they're to lose personally identifiable information or sensitive but unclassified kinds of information. So that is something that USDA contractors are required to follow.
Yeah, I would say sort of two things. One is SSA is really a little bit different than most other agencies in that 75% of the work we do in the agency is done with feds instead of with contractors. So it's a little bit less of a problem for us, but the problem is still there. I would say two things that we've done that are critically important. One is we've just upgraded the sort of automated support we have for managing contractors, and which means that it makes it, there's a more automated mechanism for us to make sure that when a contractor rotates out, that we instantly take away all access they have to the systems. That is really significant. We were having problems where people would leave, the contractor wouldn't notify us, and they might have retained access for some period of time. So I think we've got that fixed. The second thing I would go back to is this sort of, zero trust rule. What we're doing now is by implementing this new system that allows systems administrators to really have to renew a password every time they take on a task. It basically allows us to give administrative rights to contractors, knowing that those rights will disappear within a day.
Is there a breadth, or are there a breadth of contractors that you can use, or is it the same people all the time, the same contractors? Or do you have a lot of options, do you feel?
I mean, I think that there are, what we refer to affectionately as the cartel, right? So there's a bunch of big ones. But one of the things I think is really an exciting new trend going on that was sort of driven by the GSA 18F folks and by the U.S. Digital Services folks is the idea of allowing us access through contracting vehicles to smaller, more niche contracting agencies that have a really different kind of a profile and a different attitude as well. And so those things will, I think, improve the quality of some of the contractors we get at the cost of having some administrative issues because we'll be dealing with more companies.
Any response?
Yeah, so NASA does have a lot of contractors, and we have a lot of partnerships, different types of partnerships with the private sector as well as academics, and a lot of work with the public. And so we use some of the bigger contractors, we use some of the smaller contractors. We try to make sure that we give a lot of opportunities to our small businesses. So on the back side of that means you're going to have a lot of smart folks to be integrators, either whether it's within the contracting community integration and ensuring that they're collaborating and cooperating. The other side is they bring systems to the table as well, and so you also have to make sure that you've got really good systems integration. And so NASA is pretty accustomed at systems integration, and so for us to have a whole breadth of contractors in their capabilities and what they work on allows us to then be in a pretty good position in terms of managing those differences, because every time you add a contract, you add overhead and responsibility on the federal government side, and you've got to be good at that for that to work for you.
Any comment? It's up to you. You don't have to.
No, sure. I think what's been said is very accurate. The government's going to rely on contractors to do particular tasks and support work. And the idea of having competition and having healthy competition between companies is the way we want USDA to operate. We don't want to be locked into vendors. The idea that some vendors come into the government and they feel they'll always be here, we're working very hard to change that. That sort of mentality breeds the opportunity for people to feel, sometimes the contractors to feel like they're employees and to take liberties, or to maybe think, well, these rules don't apply to us. So we want to make sure that all of our vendors that we rely on and have good relationships with recognize that they're there to do a particular job, that we'll recompete that work as appropriate, and there are no guarantees that they will remain in position to continue to do that work if they don't do a good job, if we don't think that they're following appropriate security protocols, they don't respect the environment that they're operating within.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, and now I'd like to recognize the distinguished gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, for his remarks and questions.
Thank you, Chairman Hurd. I'd like to welcome the witnesses today. Thank you very much for being here and imparting your wisdom on us. I'd like to talk specifically about the Social Security system, it's CLOP, correct? The disability case processing system. I understand in 2008, we undertook a very large project to consolidate, I think it was 54 fragmented custom systems, which we see a lot of this across government, and this is good to get rid of these customized fragmented systems into one system. I also understand we've spent to date over $400 million on this project. I'm from Iowa, and in Iowa, $400 million is a lot of money. So first of all, Mr. Klopp, I'd like to have you give me an update on the status of this effort. Where are we at?
Sure. So in about 2010, we made the decision that this project was, we'll say, too big for our IT staff to execute, and so we did a competitive bid and outsourced the development of this system to Lockheed Martin and their partner Micropact. They worked on this for several years. About the time I came in, it became clear to me that this was off track pretty badly. They had already spent about $300 million.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just in your professional estimation, how can it be off track when we're talking about that kind of money?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question. I think how it gets off track is in this particular case, I think that they just were off track from the beginning. I think the way they were trying to solve the problem fundamentally was broken. And look, I mean, I'll be really clear. I think that for this to have gone as far as it did, is a gigantic execution problem with our contractors, and also a problem in oversight. We should never have let it go so far before we stopped it. I came in as CTO originally. I took a look at the architecture, suggested some very...
If I could ask what happened to the previous CEO, a CIO?
The previous...
I assume they were terminated since it
No.
was off track?
No, the previous CIO was not terminated. I think that there was some shuffling around within our oversight group as people were sort of slapped for not overseeing this right. You know, I mean, to be honest, there's a variety of places where oversight might have come from, and I think there was failure across the board there. So the previous CIO was not fired as a result of this failure, but I don't...
Was he promoted?
No. It was
Do you know if he was
no
given
longer
was he given a bonus?
No longer at the agency. Yeah, I don't know about that. That all happened before I came. So all I can say is, you know, with that regard, is I came in, saw it was off track, established some very objective engineering level criteria to be able to demonstrate that the software that was being built was fundamentally broken. When in fact it was proven it was fundamentally broken, we shut the project down. We were still left with the problem that you identified, which is we had 54 disparate systems that ran on green screens it was just terrible. So in October, we started a new project, which we call DCPS2, extremely modern, deployed in the cloud.
October, what year are we talking about?
Last year.
Just last year?
Yeah, or a year ago in October. Yeah, so we've been at it for a little over a year.
So this started in 2008, and in 2015?
We shut it down and started over.
Started over after 7 years?
That's correct.
And how many hundreds of millions were spent, would you estimate?
I believe that we spent $340 million up to the point that we shut it down.
That's breathtaking.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Right.
But I'm sorry, continue. What is the status?
So the new system is now moving along at a proper pace. Currently, our run rate is about $25 million a year, so far less than these kinds of numbers that you heard before. We will deploy our first production release to the DDSs in December, so there will actually be cases running through this thing, so we're well past all of this. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? That kind of stuff. And we believe that we're on the right path. And in fact, what we really believe is that we're demonstrating, I think, in a really profound way that using the kind of modern software development techniques and cloud infrastructure that we would hope to be able to use over and over and over again, if Chairman Hurd's bill gets through everybody, I think that this proves that we can modernize, and the cost of modernization is a fraction of these $100 million projects. We will complete this project for significantly less than the money that was burnt last time.
When's your estimation of when it will be complete?
You know, that's an interesting question. One of the odd things about agile software development, which is what we do these days, is that really we view these things not as projects anymore, but as products. And like any product, we would continuously improve the product. As technology changes, we would just try to incorporate those changes. And so the way we look at it is more of a question of, is the $25 million a year run rate that we spend on this, is it worth spending another $25 million next year for the enhancements that we can see in the backlog? So we view this thing as a product development, not as a project that'll have an end.
I'm from the private sector. One thing that's very frustrating is in Washington, D.C., there seems to be no penalty for failure. In fact, the answer usually to failure is let's spend more money. We're not spending enough of the taxpayer money. And the money that we have wasted prior to you coming to the agency is absolutely stunning. It's breathtaking. This is what people are tired of. Is there a phase 1 document done on the design of the system that people sign off on? Lockheed, your contractor signs off on, people in government sign off on, and say, this is what we want built, and everyone agrees to it. Is there a document that's created before the first piece of code is programmed?
Yeah, so I believe the first time through there was a detailed description of what needed to be built, right? I wouldn't call that an architecture document. The architecture and execution of building around those requirements was under the control of the contractors. So what we did is very clearly specify what we wanted them to build. and then there was an execution problem in actually getting that built.
Because we need accountability. Either the contractors made a mistake and we shouldn't pay them, which would happen in the private sector, or the government officials who signed off in the agency made a mistake and they should be terminated. One or the other needs to be accountability, as I would think you would agree.
Yeah, so I would agree that there should be some accountability. The contract with Lockheed Martin and Micropact was terminated. That was probably the best that we could do. I guess I will say, in the defense of the federal workers that have to be responsible for this, is it's sort of tough if the program basically punishes them for failure but doesn't really reward them much for success. So.
And it's not the federal workers that are the problem. It's the people at the very top, typically, or the contractors, one or the other. But do you have a private sector background, by the way?
Yeah, I came just a couple of years ago just to try to help out for a few.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, best of luck to you, and we'll be checking back in to see how the progress is. Thank you for your testimony. I'm over my time, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Before I go to Ms. Kelly, I'd like to ask a follow-up question on that, Mr. Klomp. Look, you're considered a political appointee, correct?
I am, yes.
So how do we prevent, so $340 million was wasted. How do we prevent the DCPS from getting off the rails in a transition? Is that a fair question?
I think it is a fair question. I mean,
And again, I don't know either way. I don't know what the status is, of the next administration and things like that. But if you're not going to be there to oversee it, how do we prevent this from going off the rails?
yeah, I mean, I think it's a very fair question. I think one of the weirdest things for me as someone from the commercial world is the whole idea that the entire executive staff of not just the agency but the government is now about to transition out and transition, and there's no precedent for that in the commercial world. What I will say is that when I came in 2 years ago, I knew that I had a 2-year time limit, and so from the very beginning I started building an organization that was going to be capable of continuing on after I left. I've completely reorged the systems organization. I've handpicked the people that report to me. I've handpicked the person that's running the DCPS project. And I'll actually tell you that I have no, I'm really, especially with regard to DCPS, I actually have no worries whatsoever about the continuing success of that project. The bigger idea of how to modernize the whole of SSA's IT organization, I think, is a much bigger challenge and has some cultural impacts. And I'm actually confident that that the people behind me are going to carry on and modernize that organization, but I'm leaving them with a much, much bigger job than the guy that's running DCPS.
So are there already plans in place to have a 2-week handover, 2-day handover, 2-hour handover? What planning is ongoing to ensure a replacement is
So in the case of DCPS, I've been actually handing it over from the day I started, really. So that's why I said it. You could have brought John Garrigus, the guy who is running that project from a technical perspective, in and replaced me in this chair, and you would not have noticed any drop in quality. And I think that you're going to see the same thing when you hold hearings, 3 months, 6 months from now when I'm gone. I think you're going to see the people that I've handpicked behind are switched on. They understand what's going on. I mean, the federal employees in the IT world, I think, are much more qualified than they normally get credit for.
Are you interested in staying? Your comments are being recorded.
Yeah.
We'll let you think about that and come back to you. Ms. Kelly, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Mr. Klopp, for your thoughtfulness and not thinking, who you work for, but thinking about the American people and the industry and what will be a lasting effect instead of a short-term effect. So thank you for that. In its FY 2015 FSMA report to Congress, OMB reported a decline in FSMA compliance scores for our witnesses here today compared to their scores in FY 2014. Does that mean that the state of cybersecurity is going in the wrong direction? No. The report caveats these results, saying that a new scoring methodology has contributed to this decline in scores. In other words, you can't compare test results from FY15 to FY14 because the test changed and it got harder. So these results do not show the situation getting worse. What they do show, Social Security, let's turn to you, the IG's audit made this significant conclusion about the choices you have made. The IG said, and I quote, SSA focuses limited resources on higher risk weaknesses and therefore was unable to implement corrective action for all aspects of the prior year's deficiencies. Now, Mr. Klopp, that sounds to me like the IG believes you made rational choices. You prioritized which problems you were going to address with the funds available to you, but you didn't have enough funding to correct all the vulnerabilities in the agency's IT systems. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. We've spent a lot of time trying to look and see what we need to do in order to be more effective at cyber specifically. And what we find is that, you know, the people are smart and capable. The way we prioritize taking things on are the way you would expect us to, picking off the high value, you know, most significant vulnerabilities first. And the problem is that as we talked about in all of everybody's opening remarks, the threat level continues to raise, and the funding that we have available to us in order to address that threat doesn't increase with the threat. In the case of Social Security, the funding available to IT is down 30% in the last 3 or 4 years. So we're trying to do more with less. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, of the 59 findings from the IG audit, we were able to make progress in 58 of them. Frankly, the 59th one we very explicitly elected to not make progress on, so it wasn't that we couldn't, but more funding would certainly help.
With the lack of funding, how did you prioritize which problems to solve first? Did you consider the sensitivity of the PII that Social Security collects as one factor? Did you consider the severity of the weaknesses in your cybersecurity? How did you decide?
You know, I mean, I think that there's a couple of things we do. One is that we focus on sort of multi-layered defense, and so when we saw vulnerabilities that had to do with the penetrating from the outside, those all become the highest priority things. When we find vulnerabilities on the inside that if someone could get into, we focused on those high priority items. You know, I'm not exactly sure, and I don't think the IG was very specific. I said in my oral testimony that we are, you know, the Department of Homeland Security does an audit of our outside penetration tests, and they've never found a critical vulnerability there. And that in the inside, when they look at those vulnerabilities, that we're consistently rated as being the second or third best as far as the least number of vulnerabilities. I mean, we have a very vibrant relationship with IG, and we actually think that there is a discrepancy between the way they evaluate us and the way Homeland Security evaluates us. Probably a bigger discrepancy than in some other agencies, but it's okay. It just means that we, you know, everybody had that college professor that gave out tougher grades than other people, right? So we appreciate IG's tough remarks, but we probably would disagree that we prioritize wrong.
Now, when it comes to funding, how much do you think you will need to plug up all the holes?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. What I would say is that, you know, one of the problems we have is that all of the new modern products that would help us improve our cyber defenses, those products are being built for modern systems. They're being built for systems that will be deployed across large clusters of servers like in the cloud. They're being built for systems that are deployed using modern service-oriented architectures and modern programming languages and stuff like that. And a lot of our systems predate all of those architectural things. And so the for us to upgrade cyber to the level that you would like us to be at really requires the kind of modernization that we need from the bills that you guys are trying to push through. So we believe that we need a significant investment to fuel that modernization and get to the point where we could sustain modernization using sort of the base funding that we have now. And we've asked for $300 million over 4 years in order to do that. And it's in the President's budget, that request.
I'd like to now recognize the gentleman from the Golden State, Mr. Liu, for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After the devastating breaches at OPM, one of the things the administration did is they did this 100-day cybersecurity sprint where they wanted agencies to go to what's called two-factor authentication, where before you log on to your computer, to get in, you would need more than just a password. You would need a second form of authentication, either ID card or something to that effect. Have you all done that?
Yes, sir. At USDA, during the period of the cyber sprint and beyond, we've achieved 96% of our privileged users use PIV cards, and 100% use either a PIV card or a multi-factor authentication tool, a token of some kind. And for our non-privileged users, the rest of our workforce, we're at 92% for PIV cards presently.
And your goal is to get to 100% for everyone at some point?
That's the goal, but the reality is USDA is about 100,000 employees. There's turnover. It takes time from a point that someone comes on board to get them a PIV card. Our biggest opportunity is to dramatically decrease the time it takes for an individual to get a card once they come on board.
Thank you. And what about NASA?
At NASA, this is an area where we need to improve, and we understand that. And so where we are with our privileged users during the cyber sprint, we made the 100% mark. For our unprivileged users, this is where we have benefited from having a permanent Chief Information Security Officer on board for a couple of months. And she has taken a hard look at how we measure it and who was considered in needing a PIV card. And so for NASA, we will report one metric at the conclusion of FY16. Our information's in process right now. But we are changing the universe of who needs to be covered by this requirement. So we're going to take a dip, and then we're going to go back up. And we have, Charlie Bolden, the administrator, has already met with the new Federal Chief Information Security Officer to give his assurance that NASA will get to 100%. We believe it's going to take us until the early part of 2018 to make that, but we will make significant progress in FY17.
Thank you. And what about SSA?
I get to show off a little bit. We're at 100% of our privileged users are using PIV cards. PIV cards are probably the most effective second factor because it's a physical thing you have to have in your hand. And right now we're at 98% of our unprivileged users. And frankly, the reason we're only at 98% is because there's a small set of our unprivileged users who work in the 54 DDSs that was mentioned earlier. They're actually state employees, not federal employees, and so it's just been slower for us to negotiate with the states and state unions and stuff like that in order to get that implemented. But I believe that we're on track to get the last 2% of our unprivileged users onto PIV cards in December of this year.
Thank you. Do you let some of your employees or all of them access their work email from their mobile devices?
No.
Okay. And how about at NASA? Do you let any of your employees access their work emails from their mobile devices?
Yes, we do. NASA has a very open environment designed for what part of our mission is to share data openly with the public and academic and other institutions. We are taking a hard look and trying to thread the needle, so to speak, between that balance of being an open environment to exchange information, to advance technology and science and engineering, and balancing that against cybersecurity. Our new, as I mentioned before, our new CISO is also taking a look at that too, so that we find that delicate balance between being open and not putting our agency's mission at risk.
I assume you have cybersecurity measures in place for your network systems, your desktop computers.
Yes, we do.
If someone's connecting from a mobile device, does your agency do anything to try to protect that mobile device?
If it is a NASA-provided device, there are a lot of protections built into how we deploy it. If it's a personally owned device, we have protections for the network against that, but the device itself is not my responsibility. But if we should have if that device is creating a problem, we would act very swiftly on that point.
So I see my time's up. Let me just conclude. I think the mobile device of your NASA employees will be the weakest link in your defense system. And whether or not you view it as your responsibility, it can cause you grave problems if they are not protected.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Klopp, you said at the beginning, the last DHS technical vulnerability assessment, there were 16 progress recommendations or 16 recommendations that came from that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And 2 were labeled, they were vulnerabilities or critical vulnerabilities?
There were 2 labeled as vulnerabilities. The rest were recommendations.
And you've addressed 8 of the 16 recommendations?
We have completely satisfied 8 of the 16 recommendations, including both of the critical vulnerabilities.
Both of the critical vulnerabilities. That was going to be my question. And then how are your own internal ongoing assessments working in conjunction with what DHS is doing?
The DHS assessments are what's called a red team assessment, and so we sort of let them in and let them snoop around, and then they make recommendations to us. It's actually not usual for them to identify specific vulnerabilities. It's more usual for them to provide these sort of general recommendations of where we need to go pay some attention. So,
are they just using automated tools?
Pardon me?
Are they just using automated tools?
Not just using automated tools. I think they actually bring some very highly qualified white hat hacker people in to go and try to work their way into the system.
And the times that they've come in, they haven't found vulnerabilities?
No, I wouldn't say that. For example, the last time they came in, we were able to stop them from penetrating through our sort of outer wall, and so we let them in. They, once in, found that they were having difficulty creating a beacon back out, and so we let them create a beacon back out. And once they had, by the way, what the beacon out means is that now that they're in, they can start navigating around because they can kind of control movement. And once we let them in and they found that they could move around, they actually found vulnerabilities in the system that we did not know existed. And we're able to identify for those so that we could go get them fixed. That's exactly why we love these kinds of exercises, right?
No, it's a valuable resource and tool. Mr. Album, so in 2015, there was no major incidents at USDA. In 2015, there was no major. You saw no major incidents in 2015.
That's correct.
You are monitoring 100% of the traffic at the external boundaries to determine if there's covert exfiltration of data. That's a good thing. I wish more people would be doing that. And you've deployed the Einstein 3A capability fully.
Yes, sir.
Right. But the IG also still found that there was 26 outstanding recommendations that go back as far as 2009, and that 27 systems were operating with expired ATOs. And OMB scored y'all as, that's the plural of you, down in Texas. You got a 43 out of 100. With the 4th worst score, and that's a decrease from fiscal year 14. Are we looking at the right data?
I think that's a good question. the FSMA scores are based on the IG's interpretation of requirements, and I don't know that every IG interprets those requirements the same way. I think one of the things we can do as a community is agree on the metrics and how to score them and maintain the same metrics over a period of time so we could track improvement. So you look at those scores, they demonstrate that USDA has opportunity to make further improvements, but the improvements that you'd note from 2014 are not the same improvements from 2015, and that makes it hard to track our progress. And being able to track progress and show positive movement is, I think, very important from not just a morale perspective, but a recognition of the programs we support, that the money that's being spent on cybersecurity is making things better and not just going into some IT black hole, which I know some people fear.
No. And that's fair, and I think that's what we try to do on this committee in a bipartisan way. Give you the tools that you need to be effective, then we're going to hold you accountable, right? And we can always, the answer is always going to be, yes, we can have more money, but we got to make sure that we're using the money that we have effectively and efficiently, because, as we already talked about, we threw away $340 million. Let's not talk about some of the EHR interoperability and some of the other agencies. And so that's kind of always been our goal, and we're going to continue to do that. And I appreciate y'all with your feedback today. It's given several food for thought and ideas on how to strengthen some legislation we're going to bring forward. And I appreciate you taking the time to appear before us today. And if there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.